The wire was 30 cents. The zero kill was priceless. New Guinea, 1943, where a mechanic's stupid fix gave American fighters the turn they desperately needed. Dawn broke over Dobadura with the sound every ground crew dreaded. A single Allison engine coughing, sputtering, struggling to keep a damaged P-38 Lightning in the air. Staff Sergeant Frank Kowalski dropped his coffee and ran toward the flight line, his boots kicking up red mud as the crippled fighter lined up for emergency landing. The Lightning came in hot, trailing thin smoke from its port engine nacelle. Kowalski could see the problem before the wheels touched down. The left aileron hung at an odd angle, control cables visible through torn aluminum skin. The pilot fought the aircraft all the way to the ground, compensating for the asymmetric drag with opposite rudder. When the main gear finally kissed the pierced steel planking, Kowalski was already moving, fire extinguisher in hand. Lieutenant Bobby Hendricks climbed out of the cockpit before the props stopped windmilling. His hand shook as he pulled off his leather helmet. At 23, he looked 50. Kowalski had seen that look before. The 1,000-yard stare of a man who'd just lost a turning fight with a zero and lived to tell about it. "I had him, Wrench." Hendricks' voice came out flat, defeated. "I had the bastard lined up perfect. Came out of the sun, got on his 6, maybe 200 yards. But when he broke left and I tried to follow, he gestured helplessly at the damaged aileron. The stick felt like it was set in concrete. I pulled hard enough to black out, but the nose wouldn't come around fast enough. He just turned inside me, put a 20-millimeter round through my aileron and disappeared." Kowalski examined the damage, his practiced eye cataloging the repair work ahead. The aileron itself could be patched, but the real problem wasn't visible in the torn metal. It was written in the frustration on Hendricks's face, in the empty dispersal hardstands where 3 P-38s used to sit, in the fresh graves up on the hill behind the operations tent. "Third one this week," muttered Corporal Jimmy Chen, Kowalski's assistant crew chief, as they secured the damaged Lightning. "Third pilot who couldn't turn with a zero. Third pilot who tried," Kowalski corrected. "Manual says don't dogfight. Boom and zoom only." Manual was written in Burbank by guys who never saw a zero. Chen spat into the mud. "Out here you don't always get to choose your fight." That evening, Captain Henderson called a meeting in the maintenance tent. The engineering officer was 35, old for a combat zone, with a mechanical engineering degree from MIT and a by-the-book approach that usually drove Kowalski crazy. But Henderson was also smart enough to listen when his line chiefs talked. Lieutenant Morrison from Squadron Operations stood beside a blackboard covered in tactical diagrams. "Gentlemen, we have a problem. 5th Air Force is losing the turning fight against the A6M0. Our P-38s have superior speed, superior firepower, superior range. But in a sustained turn, the zero wins every time. So we don't turn with them," Henderson said. "We dive, we shoot, we climb away. Energy tactics. That works great until it doesn't," Kowalski said from the back of the tent. "What happens when a zero bounces you from above? What happens when you're covering bombers and can't just run away? What happens when there's 8 of them and 4 of you and running means leaving your wingman?" Morrison's jaw tightened. "Then you follow your training and die," Kowalski finished. "Sir, with respect, I've been patching holes in these birds for 6 months. I know what zero guns do to aluminum. And I know that every pilot who's come back shot up was trying to turn with a zero, because he had no other choice." Henderson held up a hand. "Sergeant Kowalski, we all understand the tactical situation, but the P-38's aileron compressibility problem is a fundamental aerodynamic issue. Lockheed's best engineers have been working on it since 1942. If there was a simple fix, they'd have found it." Kowalski stood, walked to the front of the tent, and picked up a piece of chalk. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Granted. The engineers aren't wrong. The ailerons do get stiff at high speed. Compressibility, airflow separation, all that. But here's what I've noticed watching our pilots pre-flight." He drew a simple diagram on the blackboard. A control stick, a cable, an aileron. The aileron itself works fine. The problem isn't the control surface. It's the force required to move it. At 300 miles per hour, a pilot needs to pull maybe 60-70 pounds of force to get full aileron deflection. In combat, pulling Gs, adrenaline pumping, that's almost impossible. "That's exactly what I just said," Henderson replied. "It's a design flaw." "No, sir, it's a force problem. And force problems have mechanical solutions. Kowalski tapped the diagram. What if we preloaded the aileron system? Used the trim tabs to create a slight bias that reduces the stick force in the combat speed range. Morrison frowned. Trim tabs are for hands-off flight. You're talking about using them to change control feel. I'm talking about making the airplane easier to fly when it matters most. Kowalski turned to face the room. Look, I'm not an engineer. I'm a mechanic. But before the war, I worked on racing planes in Cleveland. We used to adjust control feel all the time. Springs, bungees, trim bias. It's not rocket science. Henderson studied the diagram. Even if it worked, you'd be modifying the aircraft outside technical order specifications. If something failed, if an aileron jammed or a cable snapped, then we'd have a crashed P-38 and a dead pilot, Kowalski said quietly. Just like we do now, except now they're dying because they can't turn. At least give them a fighting chance. The tent fell silent. Outside, a tropical rain began to fall, drumming on the canvas roof. Finally, Henderson spoke. I can't authorize an unauthorized modification, Sergeant. The paperwork alone would take weeks, and 5th Air Force would probably reject it anyway. He paused, meeting Kowalski's eyes. But I also can't watch every aircraft on this flight line 24 hours a day. If a line chief decided to make adjustments to his aircraft during routine maintenance, well, I might not notice until after the next mission. Kowalski understood. Yes, sir. Routine maintenance. I'll get right on it. One condition, Henderson added. You test it yourself first. Ground testing only. If the controls feel wrong, you stop immediately. Clear? Crystal clear, sir. That night, Kowalski worked alone under the wing of P-38 tail number 42-112652. The aircraft belonged to First Lieutenant Jake Thornton, an aggressive pilot with 8 confirmed kills who'd been loudly complaining about the P-38's turning performance for months. If anyone would appreciate the modification and be willing to test it, Thornton would. The work was delicate. Kowalski used safety wire, the same thin steel cable that secured every bolt and fastener on every aircraft in the Army Air Forces. 30 cents worth of wire from the supply tent. He carefully adjusted the aileron trim tab linkage, creating a slight preload that would reduce stick force in the 250-350 RMP range. Not enough to affect low-speed handling or cause control problems, but enough to make the ailerons noticeably lighter in combat. The physics were simple. The trim tab created a small aerodynamic force that helped move the aileron. At low speeds, the effect was negligible. At high speeds, where compressibility made the ailerons heavy, the trim tab's assistance became significant. Combined with the maneuvering flaps that experienced pilots already used, 8 to 10 degrees to tighten turn radius, an asymmetric throttle to induce pro-turn yaw, the modification might give a P-38 pilot the split-second advantage he needed. Might. Kowalski tightened the last safety wire twist and sat back on his heels. Might also rip the aileron clean off at 400 miles per hour. Might jam the controls at the worst possible moment. Might kill Jake Thornton and earn Kowalski a court-martial. He tested the controls manually, feeling the resistance through the stick. Lighter. Definitely lighter. But would it be enough? Sergeant Kowalski, what the hell are you doing to my aircraft? Kowalski turned to find Captain Henderson standing in the rain, flashlight in hand. For a moment, neither man spoke. Fixing it, sir? Kowalski finally said. That's not in the technical order. No, sir, but it'll work. Henderson played his flashlight over the modification, examining the safety wire installation. You're betting your career on 30 cents of wire. I'm betting Lieutenant Thornton's life that it's better than what he's got now. Henderson was quiet for a long moment. Then he switched off his flashlight. I didn't see anything, Sergeant. But if that bird crashes, it's on you. And if it works, he paused. If it works, you'll have to do 11 more before the next mission. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Henderson walked away into the rain. Kowalski returned to his work. By dawn, the modification was complete. Kowalski had tested the controls a dozen times, checking for binding, unusual resistance, anything that felt wrong. Everything seemed normal, better than normal. The stick moved smoothly through its full range, but the force required was noticeably reduced in the mid-range positions where combat maneuvering happened. Now he needed a test pilot crazy enough to try it. Jake Thornton was eating powdered eggs in the mess tent when Kowalski found him. The pilot was tall, lean, with a South Carolina drawl and a reputation for aggressive tactics that had earned him the nickname Rebel. He'd flown P-40s at Darwin before transitioning to P-38s, and he'd been in more turning fights with Zeros than anyone else in the squadron. "Lieutenant Thornton, got a minute?" Thornton looked up from his breakfast. "Wrench, tell me you fixed that shimmy in my port prop." "Fixed that yesterday, but I made another modification I need to tell you about." Kowalski sat down, keeping his voice low. "Your ailerons. I adjusted the trim system to reduce stick force in the combat speed range." Thornton's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "You did what?" "Made the ailerons lighter, easier to roll, should help in turning fights." "Should help or will help?" "Won't know until someone tries it in combat. That's why I'm telling you first. It's not authorized, not in any technical order. If something goes wrong, I'm already dead because I can't turn with a zero." Thornton set down his fork. "How much lighter are we talking?" "Maybe 30% reduction in stick force at 300 miles per hour. Combined with maneuvering flaps and asymmetric throttle, you might be able to match a zero's turn rate, for a few seconds anyway." Might, Kowalski admitted. "Or the aileron might jam, or the cable might snap, or nothing might happen and it's all in my head." Thornton grinned. "Wrench, I've been trying to turn with zeros for 6 months. Every time it's the same story. I pull until I see stars and they still turn inside me. If you're telling me there's even a chance your modification works, I'll take it. What's the worst that can happen? You die. I'm already flying a P-38 in combat. Death is part of the job description." Thornton stood, grabbing his flight gear. "We've got a patrol over Huon Gulf at 0800. If we run into zeros, I'll give your modification a try. If I come back, you'll know it works. If I don't," he shrugged, "well, you'll know that too. Lieutenant, I need to brief you on the technique. The light ailerons are only part of it. You need to coordinate with flaps and throttle, I know. I've been doing that already, just fighting the heavy ailerons the whole time. If they're lighter, I can be more aggressive with the inputs." Thornton clapped Kowalski on the shoulder. "Don't worry, Wrench. I'll bring your bird back in one piece." 2 hours later, Kowalski stood on the flight line watching 4 P-38s taxi for takeoff. Thornton's aircraft, 42-12652, was second in the formation. The twin Allison engines roared as the fighters accelerated down the pierced steel planking, lifted off, and climbed into the tropical morning sky. Then there was nothing to do but wait. Kowalski tried to work on other aircraft, but his mind kept returning to that safety wire modification. Had he calculated the forces correctly? Was the preload too much, too little? Would the trim tab hold under combat G-loads? A dozen things could go wrong, and most of them would kill Jake Thornton. Corporal Chen found him staring at the sky 2 hours later. "They'll be back soon, Sarge. Stop worrying. I modified a combat aircraft without authorization based on a theory I can't prove. If Thornton dies because of my modification, it'll be because a zero shot him down, same as it would have been yesterday or last week. You gave him a chance. That's more than he had before." The sound of Allison engines cut through the humid air. 4 P-38s appeared from the north, descending toward the airfield. Kowalski counted them twice, making sure. 4 out, 4 back. That was something. But as the fighters entered the pattern, Kowalski noticed something odd. Thornton's P-38 was performing victory rolls, slow, controlled rolls that showed off the aircraft's maneuverability. Pilots only did that for one reason. The P-38s landed in sequence. Thornton taxied to his hardstand, shut down the engines, and climbed out of the cockpit with a grin that could have lit up the whole airfield. "Wrench, where the hell have you been hiding that modification?" Kowalski's heart was pounding. "It worked? Worked? Wrench, I just turned inside a zero. Not around him, not away from him. Inside his turn radius. First time in 6 months I've done that." Thornton was talking fast, adrenaline still pumping. "We were at 15,000 over Huon Gulf when we spotted 4 zeros at 2 o'clock low. I took my flight down, standard boom and zoom, got on one's tail, fired, missed. He broke hard left, and normally that's where I'd lose him. But I pulled into the turn and the stick, wrench, the stick just moved. No fighting it, no pulling until my arms shook. I rolled into the turn, popped 8 degrees of flaps, chopped the port throttle, and suddenly, I'm inside his turn circle. Other pilots were gathering now, listening." Thornton continued, using his hands to demonstrate the maneuver. "The zero pilot, he's expecting me to overshoot, right? That's what P-38s always do. But instead, I'm turning with him, and then I'm turning inside him. I could see his canopy, see him looking back, probably wondering what the hell is happening. I got the pipper on him, gave him a 2-second burst, and he came apart. Pieces everywhere. One kill doesn't prove anything, said Lieutenant Morrison, who'd walked over from operations. Could have been a rookie Zero pilot. Could have been luck. Could have been, Thornton agreed. Except after I splashed the first one, I engaged another Zero in a scissors fight. You know what a scissors is, Morrison? It's when two aircraft make rapid reversals, each trying to force the other to overshoot. It's all about roll rate and turn radius. And I won. I reversed inside a Zero's turn radius 3 times in a row until he made a mistake and I put rounds into his engine. He went down smoking. The flight line had gone quiet. Every pilot, every mechanic, every officer was staring at Thornton. 2 Zeros, someone whispered. He got 2 Zeros in turning fights. Henderson pushed through the crowd. Lieutenant Thornton, you're certain the modification made the difference? Captain, I've been flying P-38s for 8 months. I know what this aircraft can and can't do. What I did today, the rolls, the reversals, the sustained turns, that's not possible with a standard P-38. Whatever Sergeant Kowalski did to my bird, it works. And if you've got any sense, you'll do it to every Lightning on this airfield. Henderson turned to Kowalski. How long to modify the rest of the squadron? 12 aircraft? If I've got help, maybe 48 hours. Each one needs individual adjustment. No 2 P-38s fly exactly alike. You've got help, every mechanic in the squadron, and you've got 48 hours. Henderson's expression was grim. Because in 72 hours we're escorting B-25s to Wewak, and intelligence says the Japanese are reinforcing with fresh Zero units. Our pilots are going to need every advantage they can get. The next 2 days were a blur of safety wire, trim adjustments, and control testing. Kowalski worked 18-hour shifts, training other mechanics on the modification technique. Each aircraft required careful calibration. The trim tab preload had to be precisely set to reduce stick force without causing control problems. Too much preload, and the ailerons would overreact. Too little, and the modification would be useless. Corporal Chen proved invaluable. His small hands perfect for the delicate work of installing safety wire in tight spaces. Together they developed a systematic approach. Test the baseline control forces, install the modification, test again, adjust as needed. By the end of the second day, 12 P-38s bore the invisible mark of Kowalski's stupid wire modification. The pilots received briefings on how to use the enhanced maneuverability. Kowalski emphasized the technique. Light aileron inputs combined with maneuvering flaps and asymmetric throttle produced maximum turn rate. But he also warned about the limits. The P-38's wings could only take so much. Pull more than 6 Gs and the aircraft would come apart, modification or not. On the morning of the Wewak mission, Kowalski watched 12 modified P-38s taxi for takeoff. Thornton led the formation, with Henderson flying as operations observer in the number 2 slot. The mission was simple on paper. Escort 18 B-25 Mitchell bombers to Wewak airfield, protect them during the bomb run, bring everyone home. But intelligence reported at least 30 Zeros based at Wewak, and the Japanese had been aggressive in defending their forward bases. The P-38s climbed into the morning sky and disappeared to the northwest. Kowalski returned to the maintenance tent and tried to focus on routine work, but his mind kept running through the modification, checking his calculations, second-guessing every decision. 30 cents of safety wire, 12 aircraft, maybe 200 pilots and air crew depending on those P-38s to keep the Zeros off the bombers. The sound of engines returned 3 hours later. Kowalski ran to the flight line, counting aircraft as they appeared. 12 P-38s, all returning. Several showed battle damage, bullet holes, torn metal, one with a shattered canopy, but all were flying under their own power. The bombers came in next, all 18 accounted for. Whatever had happened over Wewak, the mission had been a success. Thornton's P-38 touched down first, followed by the rest of the formation. As the fighters taxied to their hard stands, Kowalski could see the pilots gesturing animatedly in their cockpits, the universal sign of a successful air combat engagement. The debriefing tent was chaos. Pilots talked over each other, describing the fight in excited bursts. Henderson finally restored order by banging his fist on a table. "Gentlemen, one at a time. Lieutenant Thornton, you had the lead. What happened?" Thornton stood, his flight suit soaked with sweat. Sir, we made contact with approximately 25 Zeros at Angels 15, 5 miles short of the target. They came at the bombers in a standard head-on attack, then broke into individual dogfights. My flight engaged 6 Zeros that were trying to get above the bomber formation. He moved to the blackboard, sketching the engagement. I took the first Zero in a climbing turn. Normally he'd outclimb me and I'd have to break off, but with the modification, I could match his turn radius. I stayed with him through a full 360, got inside his turn, and splashed him at close range. Another pilot, Lieutenant Davis, jumped in. I got one using a scissors maneuver. The Zero pilot was good, he knew what he was doing, but every time he reversed, I reversed faster. The light ailerons let me snap roll into the turn before he could react. After 3 reversals, he made a mistake and I got him. I got 2, said Lieutenant Parker, both in sustained turning fights. The second one, I actually outturned him. A P-38 outturning a Zero. The Japanese pilot must have thought he was losing his mind. Henderson held up a hand. Confirmed kills? 7 confirmed, 3 probables, Thornton reported. 2 P-38s took damage but nothing critical, no losses. The tent erupted in cheers. 7 Zeros confirmed destroyed in a single engagement, with no friendly losses. It was the kind of victory that would make it into the history books. But Henderson's expression remained serious. Gentlemen, this is excellent news, but I need to know, was it the modification that made the difference or was it pilot skill and tactics? Both, Thornton said immediately. The modification gave us the capability, but we still had to fly smart, use proper technique, work as a team. The light ailerons don't make the P-38 invincible. They just make it competitive in a turning fight. We can't outturn a Zero in a sustained engagement, but we can match him for a few critical seconds. And that's enough. Enough to win, Davis added. For the first time since I started flying P-38s, I don't feel helpless in a dogfight. I've got options. I can turn, I can reverse, I can fight. That's what Sergeant Kowalski's modification gave us. The ability to fight on our terms, not just run away. Henderson turned to find Kowalski standing at the back of the tent. Sergeant, front and center. Kowalski walked forward, acutely aware of every eye on him. Henderson's expression was unreadable. Sergeant Kowalski, you modified 12 aircraft without proper authorization, in violation of technical orders and established maintenance procedures. You risked the lives of 12 pilots and the success of a critical mission based on an unproven theory. Henderson paused. You also saved lives today, possibly dozens of lives. The modification works, and it works well enough that I'm ordering it applied to every P-38 in the squadron. Furthermore, I'm sending a detailed report to 5th Air Force Headquarters and to Lockheed, recommending they incorporate your modification into future production aircraft. Sir, I'm not finished. You won't receive an official commendation. The modification was unauthorized, and putting it in the official record would create problems for both of us. But every pilot in the squadron knows what you did. That's worth more than any medal. Thornton stepped forward. Captain, with respect, Sergeant Kowalski deserves recognition. He solved a problem that Lockheed's engineers couldn't solve. He did it with 30 cents of safety wire and the guts to try something everyone said was impossible. I agree, Henderson said, but the Army doesn't give medals for unauthorized modifications, no matter how effective. The best I can do is make sure his innovation gets to the people who can implement it properly. He turned back to Kowalski. Sergeant, how many aircraft can you modify per day if you have adequate support? Maybe 6, sir. Each one takes about 4 hours, including testing and adjustment. Then you'd better get started. Because as of now, every P-38 in the 5th Air Force is going to get the Kowalski modification. The name stuck. Within a week, mechanics across New Guinea were talking about the Kowalski mod, the simple safety wire adjustment that gave P-38s the turning performance they desperately needed. The modification spread informally from squadron to squadron, passed along through the network of line chiefs and crew chiefs who kept the aircraft flying. Kowalski trained dozens of mechanics on the technique, emphasizing the importance of individual adjustment for each aircraft. No 2 P-38s were identical, and the modification had to be calibrated to each airframe's specific characteristics. It was time-consuming work, but the results spoke for themselves. P-38 squadrons equipped with the modification reported increased success rates in air combat, fewer losses to Zeros, and improved pilot confidence. The official response from Lockheed came 6 weeks later. The company's engineers had analyzed Henderson's report and conducted their own tests. They confirmed that the trim tab preload technique worked as described, reducing aileron stick forces by approximately 30% in the critical combat speed range. However, they noted that the modification was a temporary solution. The real fix would be a hydraulic aileron boost system, already under development for the P-38J model. Kowalski read the report in Henderson's office, noting the careful engineering language that avoided any mention of how a line mechanic in New Guinea had solved a problem that had stumped Lockheed's design team for over a year. "They're not going to credit you," Henderson said. "The official line will be that Lockheed developed the aileron boost system independently. I don't care about credit, sir. I care about pilots coming home alive. That's what makes you a good mechanic, Sergeant." Henderson pulled out a bottle of whiskey from his desk drawer, poured 2 glasses. "But between you and me, you should care. What you did was important. You proved that innovation doesn't just come from engineering departments and design bureaus. Sometimes it comes from a mechanic with a roll of safety wire, and the willingness to try something different." They drank in silence. Outside, the sound of Allison engines filled the air as another patrol returned from a mission over the Huon Gulf. 3 months later, the first P-38J models arrived in New Guinea, equipped with factory-installed hydraulic aileron boost systems. The new aircraft had lighter, more responsive controls that made the Kowalski modification obsolete. But by then, the modification had already served its purpose. Through the critical summer and fall of 1943, when the 5th Air Force was fighting for air superiority over New Guinea, that 30 cents of safety wire had given American pilots the edge they needed. Kowalski never received official recognition for his innovation. His name appeared in no citations, no commendations, no history books. The modification itself was gradually phased out as newer P-38 models arrived, until eventually no one remembered the desperate improvisation that had saved lives during the darkest days of the New Guinea campaign. But the pilots remembered. Years after the war, veterans of the 5th Air Force would gather at reunions and tell stories about the summer of 1943, when a mechanic named Kowalski gave them the ability to turn with zeros. They remembered the confidence that came from knowing their aircraft could fight, not just run. They remembered the victories, the close calls, the moments when light ailerons and quick reflexes made the difference between life and death. Jake Thornton, who survived the war with 16 confirmed kills, kept a piece of safety wire in his wallet for the rest of his life. When people asked about it, he'd tell them about a mechanic in New Guinea who refused to accept that the P-38 couldn't turn with a zero, who proved that sometimes the difference between defeat and victory was a simple idea, properly executed at exactly the right moment. On a humid evening in late 1943, Kowalski stood on the flight line at Dobodura, watching the sun set over the Owen Stanley Mountains. A new P-38J sat on the hardstand in front of him, fresh from the depot, equipped with all the latest improvements. A young mechanic approached, carrying a roll of safety wire. "Sarge, should we modify this one too?" Kowalski examined the new aircraft, testing the aileron control feel. The factory boost system worked smoothly, reducing stick forces without any need for trim tab adjustments. The engineers had finally solved the problem properly. "No need, kid. This one's got the fix built in." "But I heard the old modification worked pretty good." "It worked when we needed it to work. That's all that matters." Kowalski handed back the safety wire. "But keep that handy. You never know when you'll need to fix something the engineers didn't think of." The young mechanic nodded and walked away. Kowalski remained on the flight line, watching as more P-38s returned from patrol. Somewhere over the Bismarck Sea, American pilots were fighting Japanese Zeros, using aircraft that could finally turn with their opponents. Some of those pilots would come home because of hydraulic boost systems designed by Lockheed engineers. Others would come home because a line mechanic had refused to accept impossible. In the end, it didn't matter who got the credit. What mattered was that the problem had been solved, lives had been saved, and the war had moved one step closer to victory. That was enough for Kowalski. It had always been enough. The sun disappeared behind the mountains, and the tropical night descended over New Guinea. Kowalski walked back to the maintenance tent, where a dozen P-38s waited for routine service. There was always more work to do, more aircraft to fix, more problems to solve. That was the nature of war. An endless series of challenges that required practical solutions from practical people. 30 cents of safety wire. That's all it had taken to change the course of air combat in the Pacific, at least for a few critical months. Not a revolutionary new technology, not a brilliant engineering breakthrough, just a simple mechanical adjustment applied at the right time by someone who understood both the aircraft and the needs of the pilots who flew it. Years later, when historians wrote about the P-38 Lightning's evolution, they would focus on the major improvements: the hydraulic aileron boost of the J model, the dive flaps of the J-25, the increased power of the L model. The Kowalski modification would be a footnote at best, a curious bit of field improvisation that was quickly superseded by proper engineering solutions. But for the pilots who flew modified P-38s during the summer of 1943, for the bomber crews who made it home because P-38 escorts could turn with zeros, for the ground crews who saw their pilots return safely from missions that should have been fatal, for all of them the Kowalski modification was more than a footnote. It was proof that in war, innovation comes from unexpected places, that sometimes the best solutions are the simplest ones, that a mechanic with a roll of safety wire can change history, even if history never remembers his name. Frank Kowalski survived the war and returned to Cleveland, where he opened a small aircraft repair shop. He never talked much about his time in New Guinea, never mentioned the modification that bore his name for a brief moment in 1943. When people asked about his war service, he'd say he was a mechanic. Nothing special, just did his job like everyone else. But in his workshop, hanging on the wall next to his toolbox, was a framed photograph of a P-38 Lightning, and wrapped around the frame, carefully preserved, was a short length of safety wire, 30 cents worth of steel cable that had once made all the difference in the world. If you enjoyed this story of innovation and courage from the Pacific War, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from World War II. Hit that like button if you appreciate the ingenuity of the mechanics and pilots who fought to gain every advantage in combat. And leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you heard of other field modifications that changed the course of battles? Do you have family stories from the war? Share them with our community. Your engagement helps us bring more of these incredible stories to light. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.